We see adaptive reuse as part of our overall strategy in the Comprehensive Master Plan as a way to reuse existing buildings that preserves the historic pattern, historic character of the Keene, and it's also good for the environment from the point of view of using embedded carbon in these buildings and not having to pay more to build new buildings as well, so economically it's valuable.
Adaptive reuse is not a new trend. It actually began in probably the 1970s, and prior to that people were simply removing old industrial buildings and old business blocks and building new structures for retail and offices and various uses. But in the 1960s, Keene lost several very important structures, and people became upset that a lot of the historical homes and businesses were being removed, and at that time it became more economically feasible for people to restore the old buildings. There was better construction materials, they were better structures, and it was just as inexpensive to repair and reuse those as it was to build new. So people began to do adaptive reuse of all sorts, with especially old industrial buildings in Keene. And it has continued to the present day, and it also helps us to preserve our heritage and the history of the region.
So what makes a building ripe for adaptive reuse is the fact that it's an existing building stock which has been well built and has stood the test of time. And oftentimes historic buildings are built in locations that they are in commercial districts or they're in industrial districts, which allow them to be reused for uses that are current today that are different from what their intended use was.
Some examples of adaptive reuse are the Colony Mill Marketplace, of course, historically an industrial site, a mill, renovated in the 1980s primarily for commercial uses, and it became a primary center in New England for retail in a very attractive setting.
Right beside the Colony Mill Marketplace is the Center at Keene, another retail outlet mall, and originally built in 1866, it was the repair shops for the Cheshire Railroad when the railroad was extremely important in the economy of Keene. Eventually it was turned into the Center at Keene, another retail mall outlet with several shops.
Prime Roast and their adaptive reuse on Route 101 is a great example, mostly because that building, it was unlikely to be used for another viable economic activity. It's too small for most folks. So we're really happy to see a building that saved the historic character and the gateway of Keene, preserving that historic character and being used for a viable economic activity.
Adaptive reuse is so important. Years ago, I was part of the planning process for Keene's master plan. And, lots of things were identified as important, but our architectural heritage was part of that conversation, and it became part of the plan. Not just building new buildings, but reusing the existing inventory of buildings that Keene already had. This building, it was built in the 1800s, 1840s. It's a great building. It's brick and with a granite foundation. It is visually, I think, stunning to look at. Even when it was falling down, people loved this building. It sits in the industrial zone. It is on a small piece of property on a really bad intersection. I wanted to be in the city. I didn't want to be too far away from the cafe on Main Street. So taking a building that already existed, instead of tearing it down and building something else, which probably would have been a lot more economical, we'll say, the whole idea of preserving the character and transforming a really cool building into something that is a hallmark for my business and for the city is pretty cool.
Other historic buildings in the area that are really prime for adaptive reuse are, for example, the middle school in downtown Keene. That's a prime location for many, many different uses. It's a large building. It has the opportunity to be repurposed for many commercial uses, even industrial uses. So that would really be an outstanding location for some businesses to locate downtown Keene.
So there are some future opportunities, put it that way. And on the east side of Keene, there are a couple of really good examples. The Keene Middle School, for example, the Keene YMCA. Both of these are vacant buildings that have historic value and at the moment are totally underutilized. Along the east side of Keene, there are a number of others, including the Findings property on Water Street, including Kingsbury property on Marlborough Street. So these are adaptive reuse projects waiting to happen.
With the move towards sustainable building, reusing historic building stock or existing building stock is one of the most sustainable things that we can do. The existing building stock and reusing it allows us not to clear more land, but to use buildings that have been built, they're sturdy, and they're easily adaptable for new uses. So that is one of the most sustainable things that we can do.